Hear ye, hear ye. We're going to call the Joint Education Committee meeting to order and get into our June agenda. Today's topic is a comprehensive look at Knox County Schools Human Resources. And just as a reminder, as a committee, we said that if there wasn't some sort of pending business like a budget or some sort of hot topic that we needed to vet out, that we were going to use our time to get educated further on things that will help us avoid hot topics down the road. And so our last meeting of this committee is in August before the reorganization in September. And I do not believe, Evity, that we have picked a topic yet.
Okay. Not yet, no.
Okay, so if just be thinking about that through this meeting. I'd love to walk away from this meeting with a few ideas of what August might look like so that we can prepare.
Okay.
In the meantime, we have asked Mr. Scott Bolton to, did I say that right? That's right. Okay. To join us and give us a better understanding of human resources.
All right.
The workforce on our team.
Sounds great. Well, thank you all for being here. Some of the charts that I have are really difficult to see on the board, so you'll see
working,
those.
By the way?
What's that?
Is that microphone working? No, up here in front of you.
This one? I don't think it is.
Is it?
I don't think it is.
No.
Can you hear me?
No.
Yeah.
I think we have it turned
doesn't
off.
work.
Put it in this room's on like that, so we've got him mic so they can hear him.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as long as you all
Speak up.
can hear him.
That's right. So I'll speak very loudly. How about that?
Well, thank you for preparing today's.
Glad to do it. I welcome the opportunity to talk to you folks. I appreciate the inquiry. I'm looking forward to kind of shedding some light on us, Knox County Schools, and a lot of the things about it. So kind of a little overview to kind of give you an idea of where we'll go. We'll try to walk through some of these things. I want to allow for plenty of time for questions because I feel like there are probably some questions that you all would have, some questions I may be able to answer, some that I'll have to come back to you with an answer. But this was a great opportunity for us to look at a lot of things. When we were looking at a lot of data, it really gave us an opportunity to pull from different areas. Now, when we're pulling this data, what I really learned real quickly is you've really got to you've got to have an idea of what your definitions are when you're looking for data. And the reason why I say that is because, we could talk about, typically when we talk about budget, we talk about positions allocated in the system. Well, at one time or the other, at some point in time during the school year, a position may be vacated and then filled. And so sometimes by the size of the district, it's nice just to take a snapshot. And so for looking at the data, I've kind of gone back to our EEO5 report, which is a report that we send. It's a snapshot of what we look like on October the 1st of each year. And this is the past report that we sent to the State Department of Labor to kind of reference some of those things. I say that to say this: it's very difficult to try to look at that report and try to match back to budget. And some of the reasons why is I know there was a conversation a few weeks ago when we were talking about counselors. And there are certain amount of counselors that are paid for through the general purpose, but there's another amount of counselors that are paid through a different revenue stream. So when you're mapping those positions back, it may look like there's 19 counselors, but there's really 32 counselors, for example, or what have you. Those numbers aren't real, just kind of an example. So it becomes a little bit difficult sometimes when you're mapping back. So it's really nice to actually look at actual positions.
When does that report come out? Is it October, meaning that you've started? Is it time to say, okay, you've started the school year, let's see where you are, versus halfway through the year, or in April when you're finishing the year? I mean, is there a
There's really, it's, I don't necessarily know the reason behind that. It's just that the State Department of Labor requests that report from us on that day. And it seems to be actually a pretty clean day for us to actually look at that data because if we have some folks that may leave the district towards the end of the summer, the beginning of the school year, about October the 1st is actually a pretty good snapshot of when we'll have those positions filled and things like that. It's probably a more accurate picture than what we may see at other times. So it's a pretty good number to pull from. So those are some of the things. I also want to take just a little snapshot picture into the budget when we're looking at that. But I want us to look at the overall workforce of Knox County Schools. I think we need to look at that, look at what the positions are in terms of administrators, teaching positions, certified, classified staff, and then I also want to look it out and break it down by demographics, because I think there's a lot of things that we could look at, a lot of things that we could pull out of that. I also want to look and kind of give you an idea of our hiring practices in the year before, how many that we hired, and then again the demographic breakdown of that. I also want to kind of look at kind of an overview and kind of talk about some challenges that we have in Knox County Schools and some things I feel like we probably, certain things we definitely need to address going forward, and some limitations that we may have with that. And then I also want to kind of take a little bit of time talking about, not a lot of time, but talking about central administration, because a lot of times what we hear necessarily in regards to the central office may or may not be true, and so I just kind of wanted to pull the veil back and kind of show you positions that we have, the trajectory where we've gone, and the growth that we've had over the past 10 years in students and things like that. And then I wanted to kind of take the liberty to kind of talk about what HR looks like in schools, because HR in schools plays it plays by a little bit different set of rules than what you would see out in the private sector. There's a lot of things that we have to deal with. So I want to talk about trends. I want to talk about our licensure issue that we potentially have. And then I want to talk about some things like due process rights of teachers and employees. And then talk about something that you may see from time to time and how we address when the need is in terms of a reduction in force, which is kind of a little different than what you may see in private industry. So this is a huge picture. You would be best to look at it in there, and it's still going to be very small, so you may have to get a huge. I will try to. I can reproduce this for you in a larger format, because I'm telling you, it's pretty tight. But that is a lot of data. So to try to explain what we have, this again is a snapshot of October the 1st of 2018. So you'll see the categories to the left side. Each of those categories you'll see. I'll try to zoom in here to kind of make it a little bit easier. You'll see officials, you'll see administration, managers, principals, assistant principals, and ongoing. You'll see elementary classroom teachers, secondary classroom teachers, and everything. You'll look across, and the EEO5 breaks it down between Hispanic and non-Hispanic, and that's why you'll see it looks a little odd in the format, but I wanted to be true to the EEO5 report, and so I just replicated the way that it is. So you'll see Hispanic on the left side, you'll see it broken out by male and female, and then on the non-Hispanic side, you'll see the different categories as they roll across. You'll see the first bit of categories reflecting our male employees, and then the other category that reflects our female employees. And so that way you can kind of get a snapshot of everything. I then expanded on the EEO5 report, because sometimes we look at those raw data, and it's a lot better if we make sense of the percentages. So I took the liberties and made a percentage row. If you look at that bottom line, you'll see the actual percentages of each of those categories respective to our total population. So when we're talking about a number of full-time employees reported out at 7,751 full-time employees. So we have an extremely large workforce. And then you can kind of break it down by that when we're talking about demographics and things. And so I want to kind of take a moment just to kind of look also at our new hires. So the next slide that you'll see, it's a smaller version, but I want to show you the new hires. In the past year, that would be numbers that were reflected before the 2018 school year. You'll see there was that we hired 591 employees. Now that's a pretty common number. So we're usually in that ballpark of 500 to 600 hires every year.
And that's every year?
That's about every year.
8 to 10% of the workforce every year is
That's
turning
correct.
over.
Yeah. So now let me, when we're looking about that, that's kind of common for school districts, particularly what we see. Like I'm going to step out of the presentation and kind of talk for a minute, but So last year when we did the retirement incentive, I identified somewhere close to about 900 employees who could walk out the door tomorrow. This is talking about certified staff in terms of being eligible to retire. When we went down into the requirements of looking at how many people were actually eligible for that retirement incentive, it was down to about 750. So it was a little smaller, and then we ended up with 220 people that actually took the retirement incentive and retired. So when we look at that number is not really changing. Every year we're seeing more people that are that are eligible for retirement that could walk out the door. So if you think about that attrition factor, it's a large number. I'd like to see that number somewhere around 5 or 6%. So I'd like to see a reduction in that. Yes.
When you go back up to the full-time staff and
Sure.
you look at this is obviously broken down into, broad categories of demographics, and then of course you're still, how does this compare to, did you cross-reference this to the same kind of demographic makeup of our students to see how
I
it's
did.
matched?
I sure did.
Is that in here?
It's actually in there.
So I'll wait.
Yeah,
Question,
yeah,
'cause
it sure
how
is.
how does our workforce reflect our student body?
It's a great question. That's something that's a concern for me that I think that we need to address. Yes, ma'am.
Where on this top chart of the full-time people like the superintendent, your position, where do y'all fall on this? Are y'all officials, administrators, managers, or
So
where?
that is correct. We would fall under, so like for example, the officials, I think we fall under, down there where it says consultants and supervisors of instruction.
Okay.
Hopefully not under unskilled labor.
Yeah. So it's down about, you'll see,
Just under
Okay,
labor.
where it's a total of 290.
yeah.
So what would officials, administrators, managers, besides principals, what would that be?
So those will be a level of position that you may see actually in the benefits department. You'll see a few managers. You'll see a few managers. They deal with, for the most part, they're non-exempt employees that would deal with. I'll give you a case in point. In the benefits department, we have 2 insurance managers.
Okay.
We have a retirement manager. We have those folks who deal with those tasks at that level. They're not necessarily directing a department,
Okay.
but they are managing an asset. So
that line's probably mostly central office. type
that's
people.
correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah. And what you'll see down there on consultants, what gives that a little bit of an issue too, is when you're talking about some instructional support positions that we provide to each school, even though they are, they're actually in the school, they would fall under that category. So if you'll see an instructional support position, it's going to show up in that line item. And so it takes, and again, that goes back to when we're looking at this, what we're choosing to define things change the numbers that we look at. And
And the reason I asked was I was thinking people like you, the superintendent, would have fallen under the officials, and when I looked at 34, that seemed like too small of a number. That's why I was
Yeah.
sort of wondering about that. Thanks.
Under principals, you have 88, we have 90 schools. I guess that is just head principals?
it would just be head
Where
principals.
do assistants fall?
The assistants actually is there's 2 types. There are teaching APs, which we don't have any, and then there are the non-teaching APs. You'll see that 2 lines below that at 165.
Okay.
Sorry to divert you
Hey,
off the slide too.
no,
but-
hey, I think it's great. I
All
mean,
right,
that's
keep
what.
on going.
If
Keep
they're
on
Yeah.
understandable.
So, when we look at our new hires, you can kind of see the way that we're trending with our demographics in terms of the new hire. Again, this came straight from the EEO report, but I want to kind of go down a little further. And so I pulled together kind of a summary of the data that I think is kind of interesting to look at. I wanted to look at a breakdown of all staff. I want to look at our administration, and when we, a breakdown of administration. I wanted to look at teachers, and I wanted to look at students, and I wanted to look and see how our workforce compares to our student demographics. Just to be honest with you, I'm concerned that our workforce demographics are not matching our student demographics. What we're seeing there is for example, you're looking at teachers. If we look at our African American student population, it represents about 16.5% of our student population, yet it only represents about 3.5% of our workforce. Now, if we're looking at administration, we're up around 9.5%, so it's significantly more than our teaching field, but the natural trajectory for administrators is the teaching field. So that pipeline for administration is not there. And we want to make sure that we're aware of the fact that we're developing the talent that we have, and that we're going out and that we're recruiting talent that's going to match the diversity of the district that we're in. And so those are some concerns that I have, and some things that we're looking at. Now I'm going to come back and kind of address those. The next slide that I want to look at is this is actually a budget snapshot. It's taken directly from our budget. And I just want to highlight a few things before I go back to that slide. So I want to kind of talk about central administration for a minute, and then I want to come back and I want to address some of those things that we're talking about. So when we're looking at this, again, when we're looking at this budget snapshot, this is the budget ongoing. This is the next year's budget. A couple of things that I want to kind of highlight on that is you can look at what the BEP funds. So the positions that the BEP fund, and then what KCS actually has in the budget. A couple of things that you'll notice when we're looking at the BEP formula, the BEP only generates about 3,400 teaching positions that were funded. Now keep in mind, when the BEP funds a teaching position, it only partially funds that teaching position. It does not fully fund that teaching position. It only partially funds it. So when we're looking at that FTE, we actually fund our teaching positions in excess of almost 4,000. So we staff way above what the BEP recommends. And the BEP, by no stretch of the imagination, is the best practice, but it is our funding mechanism when we're looking at how much money we would have for the purpose of budget. When we look at the chart, a couple other things that kind of stand out will be that look at, for example, our assistant principals. You could look at how many assistant principals the BEP actually funds. Funds somewhere in the neighborhood of about 55 assistant principals. Now, we have reduced a number of assistant principals this year because of the ESSA requirements. Now, Mr. J, the way that the ESSA requires is that we fund, and ESSA is a federal guideline. So what we have to do is we have to show that we equitably staff all schools equitably, except for our high needs schools. Our high needs schools have to be staffed at a greater level. And this year, there's been a push in terms of our reporting requirements. We had to actually upload that methodology for full transparency that we're actually doing what we were doing. And so we have to make sure that there is some kind of rationale that justifies the staffing allocation for each school, and that we're staffing our more at need school at a richer allocation. And so what resulted from that was we had the reduction in some assistant principal positions. Fortunately, those folks, we were actually, not a single assistant principal actually lost their job. We were able to assume that through that retirement incentive process, so that was rather timely there. But when you're looking at the BEP only funding 55.5 or 55.4 of those positions, and again, that's only partially funding of those 55.4, and we do staff significantly above that. And then the last category I kind of want to bring up to to look at would be down when we're talking about directors and supervisors. The BEP funds about 93.6 of those positions. And this one is a little different from that EEO report, because you'll see the BEP actually funds some superintendent and things like that. So you'll see that outside of that. But we actually staff in those positions 78 positions. So we do staff central office below BEP. And because, you know, the thought is, I mean, instruction takes place in the classroom, and central administration, we want to be there to support that instruction, but we really want to allocate our dollars out there where it's getting the touches to students.
One of the things that was glaring to me in this breakdown is that security is not funded at all by BEP.
Correct.
Yet we fund 116 positions.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. And
right.
that's, yeah, so you can see, of course, you know, the BEP, I'm not for sure. When did the BEP 2.0, when was that? Ron, do you remember? 2007. Okay, so since 2007, there's not been any other discussion on the changing of the BEP formula. So just a few things, a couple of takeaways, and something that I took and provided copies of you. I didn't give you the full report because it's an exhaustive report and there's quite a bit, but I wanted to kind of focus on the Parthenon study that was done in 11 and 12, just to look at it. Basically, the findings from that Parthenon study was that they said that KCS is a lean district, and they spend less money by comparison to other districts on central office. And I can tell you this, since that report was done, we're even more lean. And I think that's something that we take pride in, is that we continue to look for ways that we can be more efficient with the administration of our services from central administration out to the schools.
By the way, we do have one member of our press with us today, so I think that they should, Mike should get a handout, all these handouts as well, a copy of all these.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for attending.
So, you know, I think what you're seeing is you're seeing an actual more active approach to central administration being more present in schools. You know, with the micro team movement, and with the micro team movement is getting central administration assigned to schools and delivering that support to those schools. This upcoming year, HR has never been a part of the micro teams, but we have moved in to make sure that we are providing those services in that same manner. So we will have HR representatives with each micro teams to provide that additional level of support that hasn't been there before. So we are really proud of the fact that we are, for the most part, a very lean central office. We take pride in the fact that we would rather have the smaller supervisory staff and have a more rich student-to-teacher ratio when it comes to our schools, because again, that's where that's where the impact is. The impact is in the classrooms. So that's then what I kind of looked at in terms of the BEP and how it funds and our underfunding. So what I wanted to do is I want to take a snapshot over the past 10 years. So over the past 10 years, when we're looking at central office administration, I just basically looked at the numbers of these categories that we have in terms of our central office administration from 2009 and then present to 2019. And something that's interesting that stood out to me was the amazing growth that we have in our student body population. And I think that's evident. I mean, we're seeing a lot of growth in different areas of the county. But to kind of put that in perspective, that is about 4,200 students in a 10-year period. So what that equates to building, that's two of our largest high schools in a 10-year span. So that's a lot of student growth, and there's a lot of things with that. One of the things that you'll notice when we're looking at our actual numbers of central office positions, we've actually decreased those positions by 2.5 over the course of that period of time. And I think what we're out of the direction of the superintendent is to look for those areas where we can compress, look for those areas where we can look for redundancies and try to be the leanest, the leanest department that we can be. So I want to talk about some trends and some. Go ahead.
If you go back to the comparison between 2009 and 2019, and where we've decreased by 2, but there's a significant increase under director, executive director. Can you explain that? 13 to 22?
I can't, I don't have the raw data to go back and see exactly where those positions were. I think what had happened back in 2009, a lot of those positions, director and executive director positions were coordinators, I believe is what it was called. And so you'll see that there was actually, they may have been captured under a different category, but I can't necessarily speak to how that was.
Well, it seems like the shift is actually from supervisors to
To that,
directors. So I'm just, I mean, I hate to say it, but I don't necessarily always know what those
I agree.
positions mean. I mean,
Yeah.
what does a director mean versus what does a supervisor mean?
So what happens is when you see a director level, you see a person that basically directs a program. So you see a program direction. I'll kind of give you a case in point. I think when this, and I could be wrong on my timing, so I may be out on a limb here, but for example, what we call our grade level directors, that would be like Danny and Julie. They are, that's Danny Trent and Julie Thompson, and they actually supervise principals in the schools. And so they were called coordinators, but they really were directing the function of secondary and elementary education. And so that I really can't speak to because I'm not for sure as to where that data came from 2009.
So today, when we're saying a supervisor, what do we mean? What kind of positions are supervisor positions?
So a supervisor would be a position they typically, they report to a director. So a director is directing a program. And so let's take the curriculum, for example, with Julie Thompson and Danny Trent. So Julie Thompson and Danny Trent, we have the large majority of a lot of schools, and so there are supervisors that serve under them. So we've got Salee Reynolds is a supervisor that was just hired and moved into that position, and then on the other one it would be John Bartlett, who serves as supervisors. So they report to Danny in that reporting mechanism, but yet they are supervising principals themselves. Okay. So in that analogy, Danny directs the program, and then they also supervise, so they have a supervisory capacity. The same thing on the elementary side as well. But those were at one time called coordinators. And so when I was going through this process, it really depends on the definition of what you're looking for. And I think that I have had some discussions, we had some discussions with CNI, and maybe we can matrix some of these so that we can make a little more sense about maybe central office support, central office instruction, central office, and so that we have a little more descriptors to than what we have now. I think that which was a great exercise for us to actually dig down and say, okay, what we were looking here, especially when we're trying to make time comparisons, it makes it difficult. Okay, so looking at the trends, in analyzing our exit interviews that we look at, there was two major themes that kind of come out of those. One is that people are leaving for pay, and then people are leaving for benefits, and that was that's kind of the two main categories that we have in terms of the reason why people are leaving Knox County schools. Now we're extremely competitive in terms of pay. We are by last BEP report 29th in the state in terms of what we pay. So we're pretty good. The problem is there's a lot of school districts around us that are above us.
Do you have a full breakdown of that? I mean, do you know where they're going and why? I mean, you don't need to present it today, but do you have an understanding of where they're going and for how much more? And is that also comparable to other school districts our size and their competitors? I mean,
Absolutely.
Is this a unique thing, or is this not a unique thing?
It's not a unique thing. A couple of things I want to talk about with that is every year the State Department of Ed releases a human capital report to us. In the human capital report, it will tell us if somebody reported out as a teacher in our school district and then left our school district and where they landed. Now, we don't know actually who those are on a one-to-one correspondence, but we do know actually what school districts they actually landed in. And they also report to us on where we pulled from in terms of what did we pull from other districts and things like that. Now, I will say that we're a net positive. So on some of those, we are pulling from more school districts, but we're not pulling from those higher paying school districts. And I'm just kind of broadly generalizing
Yeah,
that.
but we have the same kind of conversation with frankly, with the sheriff's office.
Yeah.
Of officers that we're losing to other neighboring counties, and then sometimes the variable of like Oak Ridge with, private firms, which is a whole different spectrum. But it seems, I wonder if we're
I really have a
paralleling.
feeling that our findings would be very similar to what you're seeing in those places, because Oak Ridge is a place that we compete with. Maryville City Schools, a lot of municipal
I wonder if
school
it'd be worth
districts.
having a conversation between you and the HR person over there at the sheriff's office to see if your data matches, and we can learn something from that.
I think it would be. I think it'd be interesting. I think it certainly would. Of course, when you see municipal districts and their ability to pay, is a big thing.
And do you see it usually being smaller districts that have
Special school districts.
It's
special
Maryville
school
City and
districts.
Oak Ridge,
Yeah.
and they pay
And
probably
Alcoa.
$10,000 to $12,000 more.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alcoa at our
It's a big
state
difference.
meeting took pride in the fact that they steal our teachers. I mean, they got up and said that.
It's money, but sometimes, personally, what I know too is it depends on who goes to those systems.
Correct.
Because I know Clinton, although it's a very small system, has a superintendent in place, and I can't tell you how many people have left to go teach in Clinton City to be under that director of schools. And so, and then you look over at Maryville where we had, Mike Winstead and people that were heavily in place in Knox County, and once they bail, they take
Yeah.
people with them.
Well, we had the West principal that went
Right,
to
Yeah.
Maryville
Donna.
High School, and there was just this was like 6 years ago,
Yeah.
there was just an exodus, to follow him. I mean, I have to say, can I ask a question though? When we're talking about this, we were talking about maybe there's like 590 positions on average that leave. But I just know from personally knowing them, a lot of those are retirements, those are spousal moves that have nothing really to do with anything to do with Knox County system.
Correct.
So of that like 590, what percentage are just by choice leaving Knox County system?
Typically, if we're looking at just around average, we'll typically average somewhere in the neighborhood of about 115 to 125 retirements a year. So if you take that 591 and then negate it by that, you'll also have some other ones that will show up on that human capital report somewhere probably in the neighborhood of about 200 positions, and then the other ones we just have left on their own accord.
Do you have any idea how many of those are leaving teaching altogether?
We do actually ask that question, but I don't have it available. I could see if I could, when we're sending out that exit survey, what makes it tough about getting actual numbers with it is because our response rate, while it's high, it's not 100%. So we won't be able to capture an actual amount. We could probably approximate, I would say, and get a good feel for that.
And when you talk about benefits, is it usually the percentage that's paid towards their state plan
Yeah.
on healthcare?
I think that's the big thing. I mean, we're competing. I'll give you a case in point. A couple of school districts around us pay 100% health insurance coverage for employee-only coverage. We don't do that. And so, in those districts around us, that's a big thing. If I'm going to go teach there and I don't have to pay for my health insurance, you talk about a huge benefit. Now, I have to say, when we're looking, and there's a lot of history to this. So let's go back several years. Historically, there was not a huge amount of employees with Knox County Schools that carried Knox County Schools insurance. I mean, it was above 50%. It's probably around the 60% category or something like that. But we had such large employers around us, that they had better coverage than us. So their spouses who taught for us, they would be on their spouse's healthcare plan. We'd see that with TVA. We see that with Y12. We see that with that because that coverage that they had, while our coverage was great, the cost of that coverage was significantly less. Now, over time, what we're seeing that the people who are participating in our insurance is significantly going up. There was at one point in time during the Affordable Care Act, some plans prohibited a spouse from being on their plan if they had coverage available with the agency. So we saw a lot of people who came back over to our plan. And then you're seeing a lot of things like that, a lot of movement inside of the instability in the insurance market. you're seeing a lot of people who are migrating to our plan. I have to, our plan, I kind of have to give kudos to the state. They run it extremely well. This past year it was zero increase in terms of our premiums, which that's almost unheard of. But if you look and track it over a long period of time, you could probably see the rate of increase of our plan way below anything in private industry. So what we're seeing is a lot of people whose coverage was affordable to them on their spouse's plan and not our plan. We're seeing the reverse of that. So we're seeing increased participation in our plan. Kind of to put it into perspective, the amount that we fund our plan is significantly less than what the county funds their employee plan when we're looking at it. So if you're looking at how much the county contributes to the health plan based on the county's document. So if you go to the how much, if you look at, I always look at it during open enrollment to look at how much they're paying for employee coverage. It'll say, you pay this, we'll pay that much. So when you compare that to our documents that we produce on the percentage, you'll see that the county funds their health insurance better than we do.
And whose decision is that within the school district to determine how much to pay?
So
is that a school board decision, or is that an internal policy?
Yes and no. It goes through, that is something that's subject to the Professional Educators Collaborative Conference Agreement. So what happens is that will go through when there are dollars that are allocated for insurance rates, it goes before that committee. If that committee reaches consensus around it, then that is presented to the board as they reach consensus, and then the board ultimately decides to set the insurance rate. But it's a huge cost. It is a huge cost when you're looking at health insurance. I want to say it's about a $36 million cost for us, I think is what it is, something like that. Is that right, Ron?
Yeah, that's about right.
So it's a huge cost, and those changes. Here's one of the things that we've been creative in doing. What's that?
Proportionately to the county side, we're seeing somewhere probably actual medical costs in the 26 million range, but you look at the number of employees, that's really fairly reasonable.
It really is.
That's just for health insurance.
That's just,
Right,
yeah.
that's what I'm talking about.
So I'm very, very pleased with here's one of the things about our health insurance, and I take a moment to kind of, this was not the intention to be a us follow on with this, but our health insurance, our retirees, if they were hired before 2015, they could continue their insurance in retirement. And if we were to even go to the county plan or to go to some other plan, that would not be the case. And so that is a huge benefit for our employees. The two questions that you have when you're dealing with retirement fidelity is my income replacement and my benefits, my health insurance. And really the latter sometimes is more than the first because of that. So that is a thing that we constantly look at. Now, we've been creative inside of the health insurance options that we have with the state. We're actually pioneering, we're kind of the pioneers in the trail when it comes to, the state offered a few years ago what we would call a consumer-driven health plan or a high-deductible plan, and which allows for a health savings account, which is a tax vehicle. And we contribute a generous amount of money into that HSA for our employees, which allowed for us to give a great benefit to our families that in the past were paying the huge health costs. Plus, it also is a retirement factor because you can actually take that money once you get above a certain amount, you can push that toward a mutual fund like a supplemental retirement plan. So we actually, if we're looking at the state plan as a whole, a fourth of the total participants in the CDHP plan are in Knox County schools. So we try to increase our education when it comes to those things. So we're trying to be on the cutting edge without being a huge budget buster when it comes to that.
Tell us about your next bullet point.
So eliminating disparities. It's a great concern to me as we look at those data and we see the things that stand out. Particularly the number of our percentage of African American folks in our workforce and not matching our student demographics and population. So we have taken just a large look at it. And one of the things that we find out is that We're seeing that also. You can't necessarily see that here, but if you look there, it is a problem also with our educator prep programs. So what we're seeing is our demographics mirror our educator prep programs. So our problem really exists at our factory for teachers too. So that is something that we're working with, and we worked with in conjunction with UT Knoxville. I wrote a letter of support for a diversity grant through the UTK, and that grant was accepted. We're going to try to look and see at some ways that we can pipeline in and improve our major contributor to our teachers as University of Tennessee Knoxville, by and large. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. And I would like to lift up the possibility of exploring something of a nature of a grow your own program.
That's exactly
I'm not necessarily I think we'll be in continuing with this conversation if we wait on UT to get the
You're right.
diversity right, because they have their own issues as
You're
well.
exactly right.
So looking at a possibility of a grow your own program that's supported by the county, supported by the district, because I think about, hey, yes, we write this grant, they get accepted to UT, they finish the prep program. Are they going to stay in Knoxville? There's not really much here in Knoxville for people of color to enjoy and kind of live a life in a sense. You look in this room, there's only one person of color in this room. And so that's the reality, but our kids are suffering because of that.
Right.
And so when you have your Grow Your Own program, you're looking at people who are from this community, not going to leave, but how can we get them qualified and trained to become qualified educators in our school system? So I challenge the district to look at something like that versus waiting on the pipelines from our universities, because yeah, UT, we know how that goes. So
Exactly.
that's just my 2 cents.
I think you're spot on, and actually we've explored the opportunity for looking at exactly that, and so we're at the bottom level steps of that, but I'm excited about some things that could possibly be in the future with some money that's available to us that we're wanting to do exactly like that. We would love the opportunity to be able to become our own factory and produce,
Which HBCU is the one that has the TSU?
Yes. Now, you bring up a great point. I want to talk about this in just a minute. Here's another issue that we have when we're looking at increasing the diversity in our workforce. Tennessee only has one historically black college or university that is an educator prep program, and that's at Tennessee State.
Where is it located?
It's in Nashville.
Okay, so then you've got to actually get those students.
Yeah, you can be. I mean, I think about a student that graduated from UT with a teacher's degree. Would I stay in Knoxville? I would go to Nashville, go to Atlanta, go to Charlotte, just in a heartbeat. Because
Absolutely.
yeah, you can write your check as a teacher of color. And so yeah,
I mean, you're exactly right, and we're seeing. You'll see. There is a lot of growth in the area around Rutherford County. Rutherford County just passed Hamilton County in terms of they leapfrogged them to the 4th largest school district in the state. So you're seeing a lot of growth there. They're having success in recruiting and bringing in some Tennessee State teachers. But that's a huge pitfall for us. Now, what we do is we make sure that we go to as many historically black colleges and universities in their teacher fairs as possible. Sometimes it's the difficulty of exactly what you're saying is trying to make those connections and bring those folks back to our workforce. It just becomes difficult. I want to add a layer of complication to that. The state this past year had a little bit of change with out-of-state licensure, and it's really handicapped us in that area. It's made it difficult for us to take a teacher from Georgia and bring them into our classroom in Tennessee because there are several steps in terms of the praxis exams they have to take to get them licensed.
What was the purpose?
What's that?
What was the purpose?
I'm not for sure. It may.
I think it's just a matter of people making decisions, not really knowing how it
And
trickles
who,
down.
was that at the state?
State
level?
board. When it's
State
That's
board.
something that I think that you ought to talk to our Knox County delegation about, spearheading of maybe.
It's a whole different entity than the state board.
Yeah.
The state board's appointed by the governor. And we have one
It's the state board of
representative.
education, not the legislators.
In general, the number of people that are
Mike
applying and graduating in the education field, those numbers are way down, are they
That's correct. That's a national trend.
Yeah, we're making it harder to bring in people.
That's correct.
Yeah. I mean, I'm continuing to beat it, but I think that's the only solution we have
Right.
to grow our own community, and especially can we get our TAs that are been in our schools for years and years and years, but don't have the barriers of going to college for financial reasons, whatever it may be. How can we partner with UT to get that type of license, like some type of license that allows that TA to become a teacher in that classroom? Because that TA is not leaving anywhere.
That's correct.
And they're going to be here in
Is
Knoxville.
this the Tennessee code you're talking about here on your next
Yes,
slide?
that's the next slide.
Well, and
Yeah.
to your point, one of the new programs that Governor Haslam had out for adults to go back to Pellissippi, maybe that's an avenue to begin that process.
Reconnect.
Yeah, reconnect.
But there has to be something that you can get a teacher's license from, and that
That's
will have
right.
to come from one of the
But
two.
what I'm saying is they could probably do whatever they need before,
Yeah, there's a
with
lot of
that program.
alternative license opportunities, and so how can Knox County adopt one of those to make it work for our community?
And that's what our intention is going to be. That's what we're looking at those areas, because that's essentially we've laid out the argument that it's not going to work from our EPPs. I mean, that's not going to happen. We're going to have to grow our own. I mean, we're going to have to be our own factory and be cognizant about making our work environment more diverse. And I think that's important. And that's going to be one of the major things. I'm hoping that we can come before you all in short order with a plan to address that. Now, the problem with that is there's a lot of steps that have to happen first. So just bear with us, because we want to get there. And so it might be a slow process, but I think we're going to reap the benefits. Yes.
When I even think, we're talking a lot, I feel like, about African American with the historically black, but the Hispanic is pitiful.
It is.
It's we're almost at 10% Hispanic, and we don't even have 1% overall staff. So
You're
that's,
exactly right.
That's a much bigger discrepancy even than
Yes.
So I think it's on two fronts. We've got to look at
We do. We
Huh?
have to.
How many elementary
Male versus
school
female.
teachers are male?
we need to get the male African American Hispanic. We gotta figure out how to get We solve it.
All right, let's stay on track.
So again, yeah, this is just the Tennessee Code citation when we're looking at licensure and the require. I mean, we can't even issue a warrant or a check for a person unless they're adequately licensed for the subject that they're teaching. It's a huge handicap for us, particularly. I'll tell you real quick, and then I'm going to move on. But Georgia has a rich HBCUs. Georgia is very rich. Here's the thing about Georgia. Georgia has their own licensing exam that they provide. So for us to go down into Georgia and to bring them here, they're going to have to take every single practice exam that is required by the state to take. And so there's a lot of things that we have to take. Let me go as far as saying, even if they were licensed and were practicing in Georgia. So that's something that we have to look at. I want to kind of take a few minutes and talk about how HR in schools is just a little bit different when we're talking about HR in schools versus HR in the private sector. Our HR handbook is Section 49.5 of the Tennessee Code annotated. It prescribes a lot of actions that we have to take in terms of guarantee employees their due process, in terms of subsequent employment actions for this particular scenario. It outlines for us how to address a reduction in force. You go out in the private sector, and if they have to do a reduction in force, it's not as difficult as it is if you're going into a school system to look at a reduction in force and looking at some things like that. So one of the biggest things we look at is we look at tenure status. And tenure status, when we're looking at in Tennessee, a lot of people say, well, this teacher is not tenured. They're an at-will employee. And that's not necessarily the case. Because a non-tenured teacher actually has a due process right to the contract they're currently in. So you can't go to that teacher that's non-tenured on February the 1st and say, I'm sorry, you don't have a job, unless you have some kind of, unless you can bring up charges or something like that, if they're not an at-will employee. And so those are things that we have to navigate when it comes to that. When you're talking about a teacher that's a teacher that's non-tenured, The process at the end of the year is there is a process for you not renewing their contract at the end of the year. And it can be for the purpose of performance. It could be for the purpose of discipline. And we actually have an administrative procedure that I think really is a best practice in terms of making sure that a person is aware of their deficiencies and giving them ample opportunity to improve on their deficiencies, and then making an employment action down the road. So we really do a good job when it comes to addressing the property right that a teacher has. The difference between a non-tenured teacher and a tenured teacher, a tenured teacher has a property right to the subsequent year's contract. So a non-tenured teacher has a property right to the contract they're currently in. A non-tenured teacher has, or a tenured teacher has a property right to a contract in the future. That's the thing about tenure status. Tenure status changed in July 1st of 2011. You have permanent tenure that was granted any time before that. And so anybody who's granted permanent tenure, you have tenure until you resign from that Board of Ed or retire from that Board of Ed. You have tenure unless they bring up charges against you. The tenure that was granted after 2011 is a contingent tenure. You have to make sure that you perform. For example, you have to have 5 years of 5 years probationary period. The last 2 years have to be a 4 or 5 before you're granted tenure. And then you have to maintain a 4 or 5 to be able to keep it. So the big change about that is with this contingent tenure, it's conceivable that a person can work their entire career for a school district and never have received tenure. So in the old tenure, that was different. After your third hire back for a school district, so after your third time hire, you were automatically tenured. So they had to make a decision after the 2 years to either renew you and tenure you, or to then non-renew you. So that is a big, huge difference from what's happened in the past, but it has a big difference when we're talking about the due process right. And then the last kind of slide I want to talk about is a reduction in force. And that is when we're having to reduce the number of positions that we have. This is the process by which that we can do that. And we really want to be very careful when we're doing this, but this is another action that can be taken in terms of both a tenured teacher and a non-tenured teacher. So that's kind of all I have. I hope, do you all have any questions?
These last 2 slides, would you say that, I mean, look, I'm outside the bubble of you all that sit on the school board or work within the school system. The more I learn about Knox County schools, the more I come to understand that so much of this is mandated by, so much of our school system is mandated by the
Correct.
state. There are very few things that we decide to do or not to do on a local level, or to fund or not to fund on a local level, that you can't just say, hey, we're going to do X without
That's
a
correct.
huge amount of obstacles. And so is that a fair statement?
That's a very fair statement.
This is a state education system
correct.
administered on a local level.
That's perfect. It's a perfect description of it. So a lot of times I'm
just making sure I got this right.
It's perfect. But so the thing is about it is that you could, when you are implementing a program or a change or anything like that, while you think those ripples may be small, there could be large ripples that we've got to address and look and make sure that,
Or when somebody makes a decision on a state level
That's
that
right.
they don't think maybe has a big effect, you
That's
can see
correct.
how it might have a
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
huge ripple effect on a local level
Yes.
when it comes to a.
Which happens.
i.e. the
And
discussion
then-
about licensure.
Well, and then you've got, which took me a while to realize, you just don't have the legislature. You've got the State Board of Ed, which is appointed by the governor, and then you've got the Department of Ed. So you've got this 3-headed monster down there making all these decisions. And sometimes, yeah, so.
We've had several things that have come this year that have come from the state board that we've had to finagle how we'll make it work, because we don't agree with the way that it's come down. But
Our representative has been Mike Edwards for many, many years, appointed by Governor Haslam. He
And I-
retired, so I don't know who it is now.
And if I remember correctly from our BEP presentation some time back, there is the BEP Board, Funding Formula Board, and nobody, this area has no representative on that board, and has not for a long, long time.
I believe that's true.
I always made that as a mental asterisk of, okay, who's gonna make sure that we finally get some representation there, but that's for you all to push on, so. This is a great presentation. I think it's helpful to understand our workforce. And me personally, I'm glad that you're looking at the data and saying, we've got some big things to solve, and we wanna, the data's reinforcing the things that, we know we need to work on, and let's not sit idle and hope that numbers change on their own.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you
Anybody
for the
have any
opportunity.
questions further? Thank you for the
Thanks,
work.
guys.
And-
Thank you
And
so much.
I'd love to see what this looks like, a year from now or more as you continue to, or push on other ideas, together.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I'd say let's use our last few minutes to think about what it is we want to talk about in August.
What's that for July?
We don't have a July
Break.
meeting.
Yes.
Yes. Am I correct in that?
I believe so.
Yes, we all decided to take a month off.
They're gonna break, good.
And then, do we have the date of that August meeting? Sure, we all do somewhere in our calendar.
Yeah.
Let's just,
See who can find
Terry.
it first.
okay, who's gonna find it
Terry,
first?
do you have it?
August, I think it's the
I've got
28th.
so
August
yes.
28th at 4.
Wednesday, August 28th at 4. In the idea of continuing to better understand, what the school district and Knox County Commission's role, and does anybody have an idea of something they'd like to dive more into? We've talked about BEP, we've talked about budget 2 or 3 times, we've talked about workforce, we've talked about academics and strategic plan. What do you want us to know more about?
Well, is there an area you feel like you still don't have a handle on that would be helpful to hear more on?
I think the one thing that continues to, and I'm only one of 4 commissioners, but I think the one thing that continues to sort of elude me is when I hear headlines or conversations about how behind our children are in reading proficiency from, they always sort of cite this 3rd grade benchmark.
Well, what is that, before you go any further with that, what is that benchmark and who determines what that benchmark is? Is it an arbitrary, or is there some?
The State Department of Education.
And where do they get it? What research do they get it from?
I don't know.
There's been a lot of conversation around that lately, that they're looking at this.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, Janet Sexton has told you, Massachusetts leads the country, they're 51% proficient 3rd grade, we're 39% proficient, which is not good enough. I'd like for it to be 100%.
Yeah,
we all
But that is
and it
good
could
when you
be
see what
depending on how we set
Massachusetts
what is considered efficient.
Right.
And I'm wondering how they set that.
Yeah.
Maybe we could talk, I do think that's such a big deal. Maybe we could talk about, and maybe bring in Janet or whoever it is to really talk about what is the reading, what are the issues
What does that
around
mean?
reading, and where are our issues on really trying to move the, as much as we try to do it, it's very hard to move that line. And
It might also dovetail, I know Mayor Jacobs is working hard on summer reading programs and reading, it might be a nice way to kind of end the summer with, some better understanding. Is everybody?
Yeah, I would like to, my big thing is elementary education. I feel like we spend so much of our middle school and high school dollars doing reteaching, trying to get people caught up that we, the key to me is, 1st through 3rd grade and parent involvement before you even come to school. And what is it we expect from our kindergartens, and are our kids ready to learn?
Is elementary considered K through 5 in KCS?
So, but I think, to your point, I think we should even look at the primary, because we have a few preschools essentially. So what's happening during that time? So preschool to 3rd grade with the emphasis of reading, that kind of can be our focus for our August meeting.
Because we spend so much on remedial and middle school and high school for the ground we lost in elementary school. If we could ever catch that up.
Well, and part of the problem is, when they come to us at age 5, when they already have, Head Start has a lot of research around I can't remember how many million, is it a 5 million word gap, whatever the gap is that a lot of kids come into school with. You know, they almost never catch up again because they're so far behind when they come to school. So a lot of
Right.
it does start before.
I mean,
Okay,
in-
so-
in kindergarten, they have the social skills, the interaction skills, the ability to share and play and get along. Are we trying to teach them before they're even ready to learn?
Yes. The answer to that is yes.
One other
And they
question.
get
The answer
behind,
is
and they
yes,
get
just to
behind,
be
and then they
honest.
never get caught up.
One other question I have that falls into the same category is, you know, do we ever hold any kids back anymore? Because I've heard so many stats talking about, you know, we're graduating students that are not reading proficient. Like, how did they get that far? Like, and that was a different, maybe that's a whole different world from when I was a kid who, you know, when I was in public school and certain people did not get passed through, and I don't know, maybe that's part of the whole thing. So can we narrow that to what is our elementary ed, specifically pre-K through third, and how does that, with reading proficiency, and I mean, kind of a deep dive into that little world. Is there somebody within your team that might be able to handle that presentation or bring in or quarterback several other people?
Right, I think so.
Yeah? Okay. Then we have August set, and maybe we can help further define that once we.
Mr. Chairman, you went 1 minute over.
Okay.
He's got kids to pick up.
Is there any, I do have kids to pick up. Is there any motion to adjourn, or, I don't really.
Co-chairman, I'm sorry.
I move to adjourn.
There we go, so moved. So
What I have to say, there was.